Hi, I'm Dr. Toney. Welcome to this study on the letter of Philippians. I love the letter of Philippians. It is such a positive letter. Paul's focus in this letter is on joy. Joy in all circumstances, whether they're good circumstances or difficult circumstances. Now, I know sometimes when we think about joy as Christians, we tend to be taught to contrast joy as this inner disposition versus happiness, which is a feeling. But I just want to encourage you to think about a word like rejoice, which is actually the verbal form of the word joy, where you actually get an emotional quality that comes with joy. Paul is not encouraging us to cut our emotions out. Instead, what Paul is asking us is to have a mindset or an attitude like Christ when we face circumstances, and to ask God to transform our hearts. And when our hearts are transformed, we'll discover sometimes that it involves a changing of our mind, but we'll also discover that God actually has a desire to change our hearts, to change our feelings, to have a deep sense of satisfaction, to have a deep sense of joy. I also love the letter of Philippians because it is a letter of friendship. And a lot of this letter has to do with cultivating godly relationships. Paul uses a term called koinonia, or fellowship, to describe his relationship with the Philippians. And so I just encourage you to think about the friendships in your life. I know I'm thinking about the friendships in my life and asking, what do godly friendships look like? What kind of advice can I get for the friendships that I have in my life? And what are the takeaways that I can have from the letter of Philippians? Now, Philippians was written by Paul when he was in prison. In the Bible, in the book of Acts, we have two places where Paul spent an extended period of time in prison. One is the city of Caesarea, and the other is in Rome. Both took place at the end of Paul's missionary times. In Caesarea, he was there for about 2 years, waiting on trial to see what was going to happen. He actually then makes an appeal to Caesar and gets shipped off to Rome, where he's also going to spend another 2 years. So many scholars would think that Paul wrote this letter either from Caesarea or from Rome. Now, the thing we need to understand about prison is it is not the place of punishment in Paul's day. Instead, prison was just where you went to hang out while you waited to find out what your punishment was going to be. And so Paul is waiting in prison to find out, is he going to have a fine? Is he going to be put on exile? Could he be executed? What are the consequences for his behavior that's landed him in jail? And so he's waiting to find out his circumstances. So another option is that Paul wrote this letter from the city of Ephesus. Now, Ephesus doesn't, in Acts, we don't hear about an imprisonment in Ephesus, but we have other allusions to Paul's imprisonment. And so a third option could be that Paul was imprisoned in Ephesus, and so Paul is writing from jail there. You think about the story of Demetrius and the silversmith, and the sort of conflicts that Paul gets in over Artemis the Ephesians. So there wasn't always a good relationship between Paul and the people of the city. And so some scholars think that Paul could have been imprisoned there in Ephesus as well. Regardless of the circumstances, we know that Paul was in jail, and that he's writing from jail, and he's writing to the Philippians. And this is a point of connections for the Philippian church, because when Paul met the Philippians, he was arrested in Philippi for sharing the gospel with the Philippian church. And so he's able to share common circumstances. He's saying, look, I'm currently arrested for sharing the gospel. Remember that time, remember that circumstance when I was arrested for you for sharing the gospel. And yet in both difficult circumstances, Paul finds joy because he knows that he's doing God's will of sharing the gospel, both with the Philippians and with sharing people in his current circumstances. So Philippians is one of these great books that's going to encourage us to look out for the surprise moments of joy in our lives. And we find these surprise moments of joy when we ask ourselves, are we doing the will of God? And when we discover that we're doing the will of God in our life, we discover that Christ can strengthen us in what we're doing, and we discover that Christ can give us joy in what we're doing as well. So I hope you enjoyed this letter of Philippians, and I'm just so excited to see the sort of things that God's going to be doing in our lives together.